So when I was about 3 years old, my mother left me, and I never knew my mother again until I was in college. And so I
Mm,
was raised by my father's family. So I was abandoned by my mother at a very young age. And my father, while I was growing up, my father was lived a riotous life. He was very much in the streets. He was involved with everything from, gambling to even trying to be a pimp and trying to do all kinds of things. Well, I became a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of my father as a child, as a young girl. And
mm.
so for me, I had to learn as I grew how to deal with those issues of sexual abuse and abandonment by the two people who brought me into this world. Because we, as children, and going even into our adulthood, get so much of our validity and who we are from our parents.
You are now tuned in.
You are now tuned in to Let's Talk About Healing on Hindsight Media Radio 103.5 FM. Now here's your host, Yvonne Pierre.
Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About Healing, where I have conversations with guests about various topics on healing the mind, body, and spirit. Today, we will be talking about the power of forgiveness with Wendy Gladney, a coach, life specialist, consultant, author, and speaker, a multifaceted businesswoman with close to 30 years of experience. Wendy is the founder of Personal Service Plus, Season of Greatness, and a nonprofit, Forgiving for Living Incorporated. Now, when I was younger, I used to think to forgive someone meant that I was accepting what they did. I thought holding on to what they did was a form of protecting myself from getting hurt by them again, or it was a way to remember what they did. But I was wrong. So, this is what we'll be talking about today. Wendy, welcome to the show.
Yvonne, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. And I'm so happy that you have a show on healing because so many people are hurting today. And so many people need to understand that healing is possible. And given the right tools and the right information, there's nothing that they can't heal from.
Yeah. So one of the key things is forgiveness. But before we get into the power of forgiveness, can you briefly share with us what you needed to forgive your parents for? When I spoke with you a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago, you were
Yes.
telling me about things about your parents. So I want
Mhm.
you to share that with us today before we get into the power of forgiveness.
Yes, it would be my pleasure. And, a lot of times people have asked me, how did you get into this topic and this subject and be such, so adamant about sharing it and becoming an advocate about it? And I started sharing about my childhood. And so basically, as a child, my biological mother, I'm biracial. My mother's white, my father's African American, and I was born in the 60s. I was actually born in 1961. And so that's during the time of the civil rights movement. That was during the time of segregation. There was so much happening in our country then, which is kind of interesting because we're going through so many things even now in our
Yeah.
country around race relations and so forth. But during that time, my mother's family and parents specifically had a hard time just grasping the fact that my mother had married a black man and had a black child now. And so my mother was very young. She was 18 when I was born, and she just couldn't handle that. And so when I was about 3 years old, my mother left me, and I never knew my mother again until I was in college. And so I
Mm,
was raised by my father's family. So I was abandoned by my mother at a very young age. And my father, while I was growing up, my father was lived a riotous life. He was very much in the streets. He was involved with everything from, gambling to even trying to be a pimp and trying to do all kinds of things. Well, I became a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of my father as a child, as a young girl. And
mm,
so for me, I had to learn as I grew how to deal with those issues of sexual abuse and abandonment by the two people who brought me into this world. Because we, as children and going even into our adulthood, get so much of our validity and who we are from our parents.
Yeah.
So if our parents are the ones who basically destroy that,
Yeah.
we can spend a lifetime trying to even just get back to normal. Well, as I kind of dealt with that and really came to an understanding of that, I understood or came to understand the power of forgiveness. And so for me, the journey of forgiveness and really learning how to share that with others began with me forgiving my mother and my father. And the blessing is I was able to do that and go on to build eventually over time good relationships with my parents. So, and not only that, I was able to even bring my parents back into each other's lives, not to get married again or anything, but just in terms of going through some healing for themselves as it
Yeah.
relates to things that went on with their life. And my father actually changed his whole life over time due to some health issues. He had a heart attack,
Mhm.
and God began to speak to him. And he actually became a minister and then became a pastor of a church and was very dedicated and committed to changing his life. And so the very first time I ever even talked about forgiveness and dealt with it, I actually did it in my father's church. And which was a whole nother story, because some people thought, well, how could you do that? And that would destroy his church. Well, it actually did a lot to increase his church, because when people can see in real life the power of forgiveness, it can do amazing wonders in healing communities.
Now, how did you get to now, for me in the past, I was sexually abused by I might have been 5 years old as far as back as I can remember, and the main person was a babysitter's son, and he had to be in his 30s then, and
Mhm.
either in his
Mhm.
late 20s or his 30s, and by the time I realized what was happening, he was long gone. It had went on from as far back as I can remember up until maybe about 9 or 10 years old,
Mhm.
and I couldn't find him to confront him, and my concern was if he's dealing with any other children in his life
Yes.
or doing something to prevent him from doing it to any other kids.
Yes.
And but he was protected by other neighbors. I would go to other people because I was a kid, so I didn't know his name, his full name, and, all that information, but when I went seeking that information, no one would tell me.
Yes.
So, I never got to that place, and I had to forgive from a distance, and I
Mhm.
had to go through that process without confronting him or anything like that. But my question for you is, because that was your father, how that had an impact on you, like, in your teen years, because when I was a teen, I started drinking and partying, and I became very toxic to myself. So, before I got to that place of forgiveness, so how was that for you having to face him and didn't have a choice?
Mhm. That's a very good question. And because oftentimes when we are sexually abused, or any type of abuse for that matter, and it's at the hand of someone that's in our life on a regular basis, can be very, very difficult to basically handle and get over. And I think for me, a couple of things. Number one, I didn't understand it as a young person,
Yeah.
but I've been told over the years that I have a gift of forgiveness. I didn't even know forgiveness could be a gift,
Mm,
but that it's something that God has put into me, that I am able to not only do, but to share with others to help them because it is something that I truly believe in. However, of course, I'm human, and I was a young lady, like you said at the time, in terms of junior high, high school, and beyond.
Yeah.
That I didn't always think of myself as the way other people did. So, for example, I was at the high school I attended. It was a predominantly white high school, and I was the first African American homecoming queen at the school. I was also head varsity cheerleader. I was also president of the Black Student Union. So I was very active in high school and got a lot of attention and accolades. We had this calendar, and I can't remember the name of the calendar right now, but it was in high school. It was the calendar created by the athletes actually picked the girls for the calendar, and I was the only African American in the calendar. And so, and people always thought that I was attractive or, pretty or whatever, but I never saw myself the same way that other people did, because I would be like, okay, well, if that's the truth, why did my mother leave me, and why did my father do what he did to me? If I was like all that,
Yeah.
So my self-esteem really suffered when I was young, although I masked it very well. And people mask things differently. Like you were
Yeah.
sharing, you partied, you had a good time and so forth. Well, for me, the way I masked it, which I would say a lot of it has to do with my grandmother, my father's mother, my paternal grandmother, who we all affectionately called Mother Dear. She was the backbone in my life, in terms of, if it was not for her, I don't even know where I would be today, to be honest, because she taught me about the Lord. She taught me about the importance of being involved in church. She also was very strong about being active in the community. And so for me, my distractions, so to speak, were just basically staying active. And so I was very busy. I got involved with everything because also I wanted to be liked. I wanted to be loved. I wanted people to care. And I guess I thought that if I was helping and I was involved and so forth, that I would be loved and I would be cared about. So that was pretty much more what I got involved with, and what took me away from dealing, I think, head on with a lot of the things I dealt with in my childhood, was just staying busy. Now, the good thing about it is a lot of the things I got involved with end up being very good for me.
Yeah.
As it relates to, when you get ready to apply for college and they say, put down your extracurricular activities. Well, I had a long list.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about leadership, and I learned a lot about different things because of being involved in the church. And then I was involved with the youth chapters of the NAACP, and my grandmother was a member of the Eastern Star. So she had us in some small group as a young child with learning things there. And then, like I said, in school, I was very involved in a lot of things. So for me, I think until I got to an age where I matured enough to probably really deal with it and began to go to counseling about it. But I was out of college before that, when that happened. But before that, a lot of it really just had to be centered around busyness. Now, I'm still busy today
Yeah.
as a person, but now I have a different clarity and understanding about it, of why I'm busy, is because I enjoy it, and I enjoy being a blessing to other people and helping. But for me, that's really, Yvonne, the basis that started on how I worked through it.
Mm. And you mentioned that the abandonment and then what you went through with your father,
Mm-hmm.
and you were saying how it affected your desire to be liked
Yes.
and to be accepted. How did all of it impact your relationship with other people and the relationship with yourself?
I think, as I shared, my self-esteem suffered so much, Yvonne, when I was younger, but people didn't understand that. They really didn't, because they would look at me and think that, oh, she's got the world, at her hands or at her feet.
Yeah.
And in reality, I didn't see it that way. I think also because of the lack of the affection or correct affection from a mother and a father. Two things. One, I don't know if I can say I really sought it from men, but I married young. I got married when I was in college. I was married to my first husband for almost 16 years. I had two beautiful children
Mm.
from that marriage. And then I really have poured, and still do to this day, a lot of my heart and life into my children and now grandchildren. I have three grandchildren and a fourth one on the way. And then I'm currently married, and my husband has three grandchildren and also three children. So our quiver is full, so to speak,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of sharing love and being able to just kind of pour into others what you feel like maybe was missing in your own life. And so that's what I've really tried to do. Now, the blessing also is the fact that with both of my parents, I've come full circle. And it's been a blessing that we were able to make amends and get to a place that we could be a part of each other's lives before it was too late.
Yeah.
My father passed away many years ago,
Mm.
and but we got to a place where it was true forgiveness, and we had a deep relationship because it was also centered around Christ and where he was able to give his life back to, which is the same way my grandmother, his mother, raised me and raised him.
Yeah.
So I feel blessed about that.
Yeah. What I love about your story is that you didn't seem bitter, or you didn't develop hatred or anything from what you've been through, and you've learned how to teach them. I'm sure they learned a lot from you and how you processed and, came to that place. Now, I eventually came to that place, but for me, my initial response was the drinking and smoking weed and, doing all the self-destructive things. But also, I was very distant from people. I had a really, really strong issue with trust and to get close to people. But I've learned, recently, I'll say the last 10 or so years, how to manage that and how to overcome that. And I just really admire listening to the fact that you came to that place even in your youth, that you and I'm sure it's because of what you were grounded in, and like you said, the gift of forgiveness that you had. I later developed a gift of forgiveness, but it took a lot of realizing what I was doing to myself because of what others were doing to me, and that it wasn't serving me to be self-destructive.
And that
That's
makes
amazing.
it makes sense because when we are victimized as children, it also has a different effect on us than when we go through something as an adult. And it doesn't mean again that neither one of them are severe, because they both are depending on
Yeah,
what the situation. But so much from our childhood stays with us. I mean, if you really talk to people, oftentimes when they have serious issues, a lot of it goes back to something of their childhood.
yeah,
Whether it's my
yeah,
parents got divorced, or my dad lost his job and we became homeless, whatever it is, there's usually something that ties back to their childhood. So when you're able to really come through and overcome those issues, that is a blessing, and it's a sign of success. Now, it doesn't mean you won't have a scar, but we
right.
can live with scars. We can move
Yeah,
forward with scars. I mean, we have
yeah,
scars on our bodies from falling off our bicycles or whatever, playing sports, etc. But we still move on and we still
yeah,
continue. So we're not diminishing, the fact that there won't be some residue such as a scar, but you can move forward and
yeah,
move forward successfully, and not stay in a victim mentality, but become victorious, so that you can then share and from, growing up in the church, our testimony,
Yeah.
about what God has brought us through. I think something I was listening to you share when we were opening up is so important, is that oftentimes people think that when you forgive, it means forget. It
Yeah.
does not mean that. And it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that, the person isn't to be held responsible for whatever those actions may have been. But forgiveness really frees you, the person who is granting the forgiveness, because oftentimes people who have done certain things to people, they've moved on with their life. They're not even thinking about sometimes what they did to you, whatever
Yeah.
it may have been. And some
Right.
people don't even realize they've hurt you.
True.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So, why is forgiveness key to healing?
I think so. Just like I was just sharing, the fact that it frees us. It's almost like they say, when you hold on to unforgiveness, it's like giving poison to someone. You drinking the poison, but expecting the other person to be affected by it.
Right.
And so it really, I think forgiveness really starts with ourselves, in terms of freeing ourselves, letting something go, dealing with whatever you can that you have the power to deal with. But if you can't, just like I have 10 steps I talk about, and one of the things I talk about is sometimes you have to release. And there's some things you will never have an answer for. And just like you were sharing, this young man that was a babysitter in his 30s, you never knew his full name. You weren't able to get back in touch with him and to deal with bringing closure.
Yeah.
So you have to learn how to forgive, in terms of it wasn't your fault. You
Yeah.
were a child. This person had issues. It's
Yeah.
beyond your control on how to find him, deal with it, or even to save another person from it regarding him, because it's beyond your control. So forgiveness is key to healing when we understand what forgiveness really is, and the power that it has in helping us to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been obsessing over prayer, you know,
Amen.
because I've never learned, of course I learned Our Father, but I always admired seeing people pray. And I just would sit there in awe, because I think it's amazing that they've learned how to communicate with God. And that amazes me. And that's something that I wanted to learn. And so I used to listen to these prayers on YouTube. And one of the things that the guy, I can't think of his name right now, but there was a guy that did the prayers. And before he would pray, he would always say to deal with your unforgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
because God can't hear you. It intercedes with the prayer
Mm-hmm.
if you're holding on to unforgiveness.
Mm-hmm. You're
You know,
blocking your blessing. You're
you're
blocking it.
blocking it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I wanted to share this quote by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and it says, "We must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power of love."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because love is forgiveness. I mean, when
Yeah,
we love someone, and again, back to the original statement we were talking about, just because you forgive does not mean that you forget. So you can love someone and even have them in a position where they're not in your inner circle. You love them from afar. If
yeah,
you know that you need to still protect yourself or protect your loved ones and so forth. So, you know, people will know us by our love, is a saying, also a saying. It says people will know you by the love that you share. And
mhm,
there's nothing deeper than forgiving someone who has wronged you. And there's a lot of nonprofits and entities that have started out of forgiveness and out of love. uh,
yeah,
uh, it's called Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, was started also by a woman. I believe it was a woman that forgave the person who killed her child,
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and so from drunk driving. So there's, and you oftentimes hear about people who have lost a loved one, and they'll go to the person who did the offense and they'll say, I forgive you. So forgiveness is really strong and powerful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you have the 10 steps of forgiveness. Could you share those with us?
Oh, yes, it would be my pleasure. So I call them Healing Without Hate: How to Forgive to Live. And it's 10 simple steps that we can practice every day in our lives. Number one, prayer. Just like you were talking about how right now you have a fondness for prayer, and
Yeah.
prayer is nothing but communication with the Lord. And I talk about, because sometimes I am speaking to people that may not be of faith and so forth. And I say, well, you can also look at it as meditation. It's where you stop and center yourself to really look at whatever that situation is that you're dealing with, and allow, for me with prayer, where I share and speak to the Lord about it, but then I listen so that he can share back with me on how to handle something, how to deal with it, what's next, so forth. So that's step number one. Step number two is all about seeking the right counsel. So counsel is the second word. That means get the help you need. As I mentioned in our earlier conversation, I went to counseling when I was actually married to my first husband. It was actually his suggestion. He said, you might need to deal with some of this from a professional standpoint. And coming from growing up in an African American community,
Yeah.
getting therapy or counseling was not the first thing you ever learned or talked about.
Yeah.
It was almost like, you keep the family business in the family.
Right.
But I saw and learned the importance of getting the right help. And we have to be careful where we get that help from, because it could be from a trusted friend. It could be from a pastor. It could be from a professional therapist or counselor. But you don't want it to be just your girlfriend, and it turns into just a, not necessarily a gossip session, but where you're not getting the help that you really
Yeah.
need. So make
Yeah.
sure you get the right counsel. Number three is all about confronting. You have to face whatever it is, and sometimes, depending on what the situation is, did we have a role in it? Whatever happened, did we do something? So for example, let's say we had a falling out with one of our best friends,
Hmm.
and you don't understand why she's not talking to you anymore. But then you might find out that you said something to another mutual friend of both of yours a year ago that she just found out about, and she's upset because in her mind you broke her trust. But you're not even knowing that because you forgot that you told this other friend a year ago. So we have to confront situations. Do I play a role in what happened? Or am I a victim of what happened? But
Yeah.
when you confront it, I talk about the difference between looking in a mirror, which is when we have to look at ourselves, and when
Hmm.
we are looking through a glass window. So looking through the glass window, it's somebody else's fault, but we still got to deal with it. Looking in the mirror means we had something to do with that situation and we need to get it right. Number
Yeah.
four is all about releasing. And that's what I was saying, that sometimes we have to learn to let some things go. We may never get answers to everything. We may never, be able to contact somebody. And sometimes people will say to me, but Wendy, I need to do something. I need to do something. I'm holding on to it. And I'll say, well, you know what? Write a letter. You can always write a letter to someone, and you can even take it to the post office and mail it. Just don't put an address on it.
Yeah.
They'll get rid of it. And but what it does is it's an exercise that helps you get it out, and you've released it now and you can let it go. Step 5 is all about the cornerstone of just forgive. And there's a difference between pardon and parole. When you pardon someone, it's as if it didn't happen, not in terms of consequences or that they shouldn't be held responsible, but so that it doesn't control you. Whereas when you parole someone in forgiveness, you really still haven't forgiven, because now that person still controls you. Because have you ever heard someone say, well, I forgive her, but if she ever does that again, I'm blah, 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 blah. Well, you really
Yeah.
haven't forgiven her, because now you're going to always be looking to see if she's going to do that again. And which means she's still controlling you. She's still controlling your actions, your mindset. And you have to learn to pardon situations in the fact that it doesn't control you anymore. And you've done all you can, you've brought closure, and you let it go.
Before you get to 6, I want to ask about pardon and parole.
Okay.
Now, how does that contribute to forgive and not forget?
Okay, that's a good question because again, pardon as if it didn't happen. You're not forgetting what happened, but you are making sure that it doesn't control you, which means you may have to put that person on the outside. So, for example, with my father, even though my dad had changed his life
Hmm.
and he became a wonderful man and a man of the church and a pastor and all that, and I forgave him and I was involved in his life and I was actually even attending his church. I still never let my daughter alone with him ever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where, I have forgiven him and we've moved on with a great relationship. But I still was going to make sure that I protected what who and what I needed to protect, whether it's
Right.
me, my daughter, and so forth. And my children had a very good relationship with their grandfather before he, passed away. But I still never left them alone by themselves. My daughter, with him. So that way I had peace of mind and everything could just move forward. So regarding pardon and versus parole, it's just about making sure that the situation doesn't control you for the rest of your life.
Mm. Yeah.
You understand? Is that
Yeah.
clear? Okay.
Yeah.
So number 6 is all about attitude. And what I mean by that is similar to what you were saying about it didn't seem like I was bitter or angry. And I wasn't. I never have been. In anything I've gone through, I've never been bitter or angry. I may have been disappointed. I may have been frustrated of not understanding certain things, but I've never been bitter or angry. And I think that what I can attribute that to is I've always tried to get up every single day with an attitude of gratitude.
Mm.
And when we understand the things that we should be grateful for in this lifetime, it helps us deal with the things that are disappointing or bad. Because no matter what we go through in life, we don't even have to really look too far to see someone who's even had it worse. Because of the kind of work I've done and the ministries that I've been involved with and the ability to work with different things and going into places like Soweto in South Africa and even parts of just right here in the United States. We don't even have to go to a foreign country, but you see how some people live or what some
Yeah.
people go through, and they never get out of it. It's so I believe that when you're able to still open your eyes, you have a chance to make a better day. You have a
Yeah.
chance to improve your life. You have an opportunity to be able to be a blessing to someone, even if you can use your scars as stepping stones to help someone else get over the bridge of what they're going through right now. So I always try to have an attitude of gratitude. Step 7 deals with joy and happiness. And what I talk about is sometimes, like they say, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Life
Hmm.
is not always going to be beautiful every day. And,
Yeah.
but there are certain things that we can do to help improve our lot on a particular day. And the first thing I talk about is when you grow up in church, as I did, you learn a lot about what they call the joy that's deep down inside that no one can take away. And that
Yeah.
basically is your center, your core. And sometimes people never stop long enough to think about what are their values? What is the core of your life? Why do you exist? What makes you get up every day and want to be your best self or make a difference or do something positive? Those are the things that nobody should ever be able to take away from you. And so when you're having a hard day and things aren't going right or something happens bad, go back to that joy that only God can give you, that is your birthright in terms of making, your life better. And so what I say is that when you're dealing with sadness and you're dealing with things that are beyond your control, just go back to your joy in the center. And then happiness is all about what's happening all around you. So I talk about there are things you can do in your life. So, for example, I love flowers, but I do not have a green thumb. I have some of the best artificial flowers that look real. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
I love a good cup of tea.
Yeah.
And I have tea every morning. And if I'm ever out of tea, people know something's wrong because I love a nice cup of tea, and I even like it in certain teacups. And then
Yeah.
I love pictures of my loved ones and my family and friends all around me, and so I have them all over the place. I like a nice glass of wine sometimes. So the point being that if there are things that you know that make you happy, surround yourself with those things so that when those
Yeah.
bad days come again, I can come home, kick my shoes off, kiss my husband, and look at the pictures around me, grab a cup of tea or a glass of wine, or, look at the flowers, light a candle. I love candles.
Yeah.
And, just kind of breathe, just pause and breathe. So you have to know what are the things that bring you joy and happiness. Step 8 is goals. Always have something that you're striving for. And I don't mean necessarily more money or anything like that, but what is something that makes you happy? What's a hobby you like? Or what's a career you would love to transition into? What are the things that you so desire that you can each day look forward to getting up? Because depression and things like that set in when we don't have goals, when we don't have dreams, when we don't have anything to look forward to the next day. And it becomes where you don't even want to get out of bed and so forth. So have goals, write them down. Step 9, I call it give. And that's when you share with others, whether that's share your testimony to help them out, whether that's share and be generous and give a little money to someone that needs a little help, giving your time, running an errand. Do something that where you're giving back to others, because also when you're going through hard times or you're trying to learn how to forgive someone or heal from a situation, when you take the focus off yourself and put it on helping someone else, your troubles don't seem as magnified. They seem to diminish because your focus is on helping others. And then finally, step 10. Step 10 is all about live today. Live, because tomorrow's not promised to us. So we can't keep putting off and saying, oh, I'm going to enjoy this tomorrow, or I'm going to see my grandchildren tomorrow, or whatever. If there's something you can do today, do it today. Now, I'm not talking about being irresponsible where you don't handle work and do the things
Right.
you need to do, but I'm just saying for the people that always put off for tomorrow.
Mhm.
There was a whining song called Tomorrow, and tomorrow might be too late. And
Yeah.
so there are things that if we can do today, if you can bless someone today, do it. If you can live your fullest today, do it. Whatever you can do today, be grateful for that day that God has given you and try to live your best life. So those
Mhm.
are the 10 steps that have worked for me, continue to work for me, that I've shared with others that have been a blessing to them.
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing process. It's not like we do these things one time and like, okay, I've done them, done. No, it becomes a lifestyle.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
mantra that I write on almost all my articles and everything that I write and do, and it's called Healing Without Hate. It's a choice, it's
Mm.
a lifestyle. Pass it on.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So the 10 steps: prayer, seeking counsel, confronting, releasing. 5 is forgive, pardon, or parole.
Yes,
Attitude, joy, and happiness. Number 8 is goals. Number 9 is give. Number 10 is live today.
yes.
That's awesome. And I wrote them down.
Thank you. Hmm.
Yeah. So, what would you say to someone? Well, before I ask that, in relationships, sometimes we have to forgive.
Hmm.
Well, a lot of times we may have to forgive our partner. And I used to hold on to stuff real tight with my husband. Like anytime I got mad, it went on a invisible list
Hmm. I
of
understand.
everything. Yeah, of everything that I'm mad about. I'm putting it on the list, and I'll say I forgave, and then later I'll come back, and if we have a disagreement, everything on that list I'm bringing back up.
Hmm.
And that's because a lot we're not taught. I wasn't taught how to love, I wasn't taught how to forgive, I wasn't taught any of that, and I grew up around people that kept lists. So that was a learned behavior. And one
Mhm.
day he was laying there asleep, and I just got really sad because I said, if anything was to happen to either one of us, and I'm holding on to this list and I'm
Mhm.
being unforgiving, I'm telling him I forgive, and I'm not really tearing down the walls to really love him and show him love and allowing him to fully love me. And I thought to myself, either I need to be all in or I need to be out, because
Yes.
this is not fair. What the thing was, I thought, if he was to pass today, the part
Mhm.
that would destroy me the most is that I didn't allow him. I took up the space in his life of an unloving space that could have been filled with love and memories, and I said, the way I'm being, the things that I'm holding on to and the unforgiveness that I'm carrying is not only a disservice to him, but it's also a disservice to me. And I wouldn't want to leave this earth and not know what love is like, what true love is like,
Uh,
or what love is like for him. I wouldn't want him to leave here and not know what love is like.
That's deep. That's really deep.
I learned in that moment forgiveness in our relationship, because everything is not worth that, and carrying those bricks, to build these
Mhm.
walls up, against people, and that take a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of energy, and, I rather us either not be together or be together fully, and from then on, yeah, I will still have moments where I get upset, but then I had to forgive. You know, I had to
Mhm.
really process, what am I really mad about? What am I upset
Mm.
about? And also to be accountable for my part in it, like you mentioned earlier, looking at either the mirror or the glass, and there's many a times I had to look, at the glass, and there are times I had to look in the mirror and recognize my part in what I'm upset about.
Mhm.
The
Yep.
miscommunication and the little small things that really in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't is not that important to hold on to it or to harbor anger because he, did something very small, and then realizing, oh, he was doing that because he just woke up and he didn't even realize I was standing there. Just
Yeah.
as an
Yeah.
example. Yeah,
Right. Misunderstanding. It's
it's a
just
yeah,
sometimes some things are just
yeah,
misunderstandings, and we have to just get clarity. And that's why communication is so important, because miscommunication can cause a whole domino effect that you go down a rabbit hole, and next thing you know, it's like that game that people used to play called the telephone game, and you start saying something and you go around in a circle, and by the time it gets back to you, and people have whispered in each ear next to them, it's not even what you said.
right,
So you're like, wait a minute, that's not what I
yeah,
said. So it's the same thing. We can have a lot of misunderstandings if we're not
yeah,
communicating.
a horrible grapevine.
Mhm.
Horrible, yeah,
Yes, a horrible
yeah,
grapevine.
yeah. So the question I wanted to ask, because in your case, your father changed. He got into church.
Mhm.
No better change than to go to God.
Amen.
Yeah. So
Mhm.
that helps with forgiveness. But what about for those who their fathers never changed? They never did a 160. They never changed. So what about how do someone process that? If their loved one or their friend or whatever, they say the best I'm sorry is a change behavior. But what if they
Mhm.
not sorry and they behavior never change?
Well, first of all, that kind of goes back to step 4 about release,
Mhm.
where sometimes there's some things that you just have to learn to let
Yeah,
go, that you don't have control
yeah,
over. And once you have done all that you can do, there comes a time when then you have to let go and let God. And there's going to be many times when there's things out of our control. Sometimes people pass away before you're ever able to make amends or get clarity or have a conversation. There's sometimes people go to prison, sometimes people move away and you don't know where they move. I mean, there's so many reasons that could be out of our control, and that's why step 4 about releasing and learning to just let some things go in life is so critical. We like it says, we don't know what tomorrow holds, but we do know who holds
yeah,
tomorrow. And that's why we have to be anchored. And so for people who do not have faith or have, I mean, I'm a Christian, but I do know there are people out there that may be of different spiritual backgrounds and so
yeah.
forth. And if they have nothing to hold on to,
Mhm.
whatever it is, you can be like a sinking ship. And it just can be devastating. And that's why it's so important, again, back to even dealing with step 7 about joy and happiness, is you've got to have your core. What are your values? What is important for you? What is going to keep you going in the center no matter what's happening in life? You have to have something that anchors you. So if you can't get to a place where you can really get complete closure and forgiveness with someone, then you have to learn to just let it go so it doesn't destroy the rest of your life.
Yeah, yeah. So I think you already said one of the things that just listening to you, the way you processed and the way you dealt with just life in general speaks volumes about who you are. And so I was just curious to know what aside from church, what do you think molded you to be who you are?
My grandmother.
Mm,
Yeah, Rebecca Ruth Reed Harris, my grandmother on my father's side. Um, she may have struggled a little bit with dealing with some of the things between me and my father because my grandmother was first born generation free in our family. She was born right around the turn of the century. Her father was born in 1861. So he was born a slave and freed as a little boy. And my grandmother, she came from the South and moved west with my grandfather, but my grandfather passed away before I was born. And my grandmother raised 9 children, and she had, a ton of grandchildren, great grandchildren, and she was the rock of our family. And if it had not been for her, like I said, I don't know where I would be, because she was who put in me my faith, and then to believe in myself no matter what has happened. When my mother walked away, my grandmother scooped me up
mm,
and made sure that I wasn't, lost out there totally in the world. And she gave me my core values. And she was not the cuddly kind of grandmother. My grandmother was a hard worker.
yeah,
And she was, a no joke. But she may not have said "I love you" to us, all the time, but her actions, like you were just saying about how actions is the best sign of a changed mind or changed
yeah,
heart. Well, she didn't have to change anything, but her
yeah,
actions. I mean, she loved me, and I think that if it had not been for her, I don't know where I'd be, Yvonne.
yeah.
So for me, who molded me, I do a blog, and I do an article every week for 2 different newspapers and stuff. And my article this week is about an open love letter to our ancestors and for Valentine's Day. And my grandmother is right there in the middle of that picture because it's a collage of some of my ancestors. And I mean, I'm grateful. I will, when I get to heaven, the first thing the first thing is I'll thank Jesus. But the
Right.
second thing will be I'll be thanking the Lord for my grandmother.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. My grandmother too. Yeah,
Grandmothers and aunties and so forth can really make the difference in a person and in a child's
yeah,
life. So sometimes when our parents may feel a certain way, God always has a ram in the bush.
yeah,
And for me, that ram was my
yeah.
grandmother.
Mine too. My grandmother was.
Mhm.
She was tough too, and, on
Mhm.
the outside, but she had the biggest heart, and
Yeah.
I was really, really close to her too, and a lot of my no nonsense, just get it done,
Yes.
came from her,
Mhm.
she was a rock
Yeah.
in a good way.
Mine too. Yeah, and it's so funny because, like, we could never say, "I'm bored, I have nothing to do," because she'd say, "You bored?" And next thing I know, we're outside pulling weeds,
Yeah,
we're sweeping the front porch, we're doing some kind of cleaning in the house, and so we learned, don't say you're bored because she will definitely make sure you don't have idle hands.
yeah,
And she just but she taught me so much. And then with my grandmother, she was truly a believer that the early bird gets the worm.
yeah,
So she'd make us get up. And sometimes I remember saying, because there was always a multiple of people living with my grandmother. And so she'd
yeah,
say, "Get up, get up."
yeah,
She'd come to the room, "Get up, get up." And it's like, it's 6 o'clock on a
yeah,
Saturday. And she's like, "Yeah." She said, "There's something you could do."
yeah,
I'm like, "Oh my gosh."
flow,
So
yeah,
I'm like
yeah,
that to this day.
yeah,
I still get up early.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Like, we can talk forever about our grandmothers. They were amazing people, and the stuff that they
Yes.
endured, and, what we have to endure is nothing compared to what they had to endure. So,
Yes.
they passed that on. That was a gift that they passed on, and that was a resilience. And yeah,
Yes.
a beautiful thing, very beautiful.
Yes.
You
Yes.
mentioned your blog and your newsletter. Did you wanna share that?
Sure. I mean, you can learn anything to connect with me and so forth by just going to wendygladney.com. And that's WendyGladney.com. And all of my social media handles are the same, Wendy Gladney. So I'm real easy to find. If you know my name, I'm real easy. And each week I put out new things on social media and on my website. I also write a column for the Los Angeles Sentinel and the Inland Valley
Mm,
News every week. So it's easy to kind of connect with me. So if any of your listeners would love to learn more or chat, please feel free to reach out.
that's awesome. Before we go, tell us about your coaching services.
Oh, thank you, Yvonne. Yes, so I am a coach, and I also specialize with women, and I have an entity called Season of Greatness, where I really help and walk through with women, especially. I'm not saying I wouldn't help men, but my specialty is
Yeah,
women, to really help them find their best selves, and that no matter where they are in life, there's a season for
yeah,
you, and that we can also have multiple good seasons or great seasons, because what was important to you in your 20s is not the same in your 40s or your 60s and beyond. So you can learn about Season of Greatness and my coaching by still going to wendygladney.com.
wow. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing to help people to forgive and ultimately to love, to learn, really, really learn how to love. Because I really think forgiveness is about love. And yeah, it's really amazing, and you have the superpower to forgive, because that's not easy for most people.
Just like I say in my mantra, it's a choice.
Yeah,
And it's about every day getting up, with a positive vibe, a positive attitude. And, again, that doesn't mean you're just a pansy and you get up and say, "Oh, I'm going to forgive everybody." No,
yeah, it's a
we still
process.
have to hold people
Yeah,
accountable for what they
yeah,
do. But it's about having an open mind and letting God work through you and with you. And then, dealing with issues and then saying, "Okay, how do we get through this? How do we get to a resolve and answer?"
yeah,
And then just and be mindful about it. And I love how you talk about love and how love is a part of forgiveness and love is a part of healing.
yeah, yeah. And realizing that, sometimes you got to give people grace. We're all on this journey, going
Amen.
somewhere we've never been every
Amen.
day.
Amen. Mhm. Amen.
Yeah. So, sometimes a lot of people are growing, and some people, refuse to grow. And some people are making mistakes, but you just gotta, you know, really step outside yourself to see people for who they are,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's good or bad, but truly to see them with your heart and not through anger and bitterness. So yeah, it's a beautiful place to be once you get there.
Amen.
Yeah.
So true. So true. Sometimes we just have to get out of our own way.
Yeah. Wendy Gladney, thank you so much for coming on the show and speaking with us and talking, helping us through this forgiveness thing.
Well, thank you, Yvonne, and continue spreading your message about healing. It's so needed in our world today.
Thank you. And to our listeners, I would love to hear from you. I hope that you were inspired to forgive someone so that you can be free. Thank you so much for tuning in to Let's Talk About Healing. Be sure to follow, like, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Look, you owe it to yourself to grow and heal on purpose. Until next time, be blessed and be a blessing.
Thank you for tuning in to Let's Talk About Healing with Yvonne Pierre on Hindsight Media Radio 103.5 FM. We hope you enjoyed the show. Be sure to subscribe, like, and share.